This episode is special, not only because I'm joined by a dear friend, but also because it features two intertwined interviews. In the first half, I take on the role of the interviewer, and in the second half, I become the interviewee. Both conversations explore the central theme of reclaiming evolution, venturing into unique areas that beautifully complement each other. In the second part, Jordi interviews me as part of her series with the facilitators and presenters for her upcoming in-person festival in central Alberta, Canada this summer, where, of course, I will be contributing. So we felt it made perfect sense to weave these conversations together for this particular project, and we hope that you will agree. Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I'm your host, Tay Tayari, and today's guest is Jordi Lydia. In this conversation, we explore the vital topic of reclaiming evolution, not as linear progress towards some kind of perfection, but as a revitalizing of deep time presence and an embodied relationship with life's intelligence. We dive into the importance of unlearning, surrendering to a greater will, and metabolizing grief and darkness to nourish renewal. Jordi reflects on how reclaiming evolution is both a personal and collective journey, one that calls us to immerse in the elements, reconnect with each other, and rediscover our creative brilliance. She also shares the inspiration behind Reclaiming Evolution, an immersive festival designed to foster deep connection and community through experiential workshops and artistry. And as I mentioned at the beginning, in the second half of the episode, Jordi flips the mic and interviews me for her festival's companion podcast, continuing our conversation on communion, creativity, community, and the wild, heartfelt path that may lead us toward a more rooted, reverent, and regenerative future as we reclaim evolution together. Jordi is a mother to 2 daughters and 1 son living in Alberta, Canada. She is passionate about supporting individuals along their journey of remembrance and restoring balance within their inner systems through connecting with the felt sense of truth and their innate brilliance. She facilitates group, large and small, in-person offerings, large-scale sacred events such as festivals and retreats, as well as one-on-one programs working intimately with individuals, their businesses, and various life stages and phases. And she is a dear friend of mine, so I am truly honored to host her on this project. If you're new to the show, you might like to know that I'm a threshold counselor with an online practice dedicated to supporting wanderers, wanderers, and edgewalkers. I offer individual, couples, and group counsel, as well as support around death and dying. To learn more, visit my website through the link in the show notes, and know that I offer free insight calls, which provide a risk-free opportunity for us to connect, explore our alignment, and determine if we're a good fit to walk alongside each other during a pivotal time in your life. I'm generally open to connecting via email and video chat if you feel naturally drawn to do so, whether for guidance, curiosity, collaboration, or any other meaningful reason. So feel free to reach out at any time. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to Wild Heart Revival on your preferred podcast platform, and know that your likes, comments, ratings, and shares are not only deeply appreciated, but they are vital for supporting the organic growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, let's warmly welcome dear Jordi Lydia for a rich and radical discussion on what reclaiming evolution might look and feel like, and how we can nurture and nourish the roots of this essential individual and collective emergence together. What does reclaiming evolution mean to you?
Mm-hmm. What does reclaiming evolution mean to me? I think it's a multi-layered answer. I think that it's an invitation into presence, into the present moment of life, into where we are right now, into where you are right now, and reclaiming what resides in that subtle field, deepening into the remembrance of what we hold within ourselves as human beings, as men and as women, and strengthening our relationship into what resides in that moment, which there's so much that's with you if you just pause and really like consider like what you're arriving into a moment with. You know, everything in your body, all the systems in your body, all the stories that you carry, all the, you know, pathways that you've walked have all led you to that moment in time. And so everything that's with you, you know, what is there and residing in a presence that allows you to connect with what's there. And the evolution piece is, you know, our right, or our motion, the motion of life that's evolutionary, that evolves us, that requires us to be reborn and welcome a death to what was, to be reborn into what is to come and is, you know, what's being invited, and growing from that place instead of staying stagnant, repeating what has been, just in other ways, you know, evolving through it. And I think a big part of evolution is welcoming the descent, like welcoming the decomposing of what's no longer, not no longer serving, but what's transforming in the way that it serves. You know, the way that something serves can be through the decomposing of what it was to be what it can be, to evolve through. And so, yeah, reclaiming evolution, it's a lot about meeting in presence, presencing to what is, and listening, experiencing what is there in that presence.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think of evolution, I think of innovation. You know, life on Earth has been evolving through consistent innovation, innovating on old patterns and creating new, harmonized, emergent, complex systems to be exactly what you're talking about, in a different word, responsive to what's actually happening, alive to the immediacy and the imminency of what's really here for us. And so the reclamation of that, it makes total sense that it would be this slowing and steeping and listening and sensitizing enough to be able to be responsive to what's being asked of us as earthly creatures. And so it makes me think back to the innovation piece, that there's this sense for me that the reclaiming of evolution is the reclaiming of innovation, which is the reclaiming of creativity, right? The reclaiming of our creative nature, our creative capacities. You see it that way?
Well, and I think almost like a reclaiming of our relationship to the innate intelligence of life, which is creative in nature. It's bringing ourselves back to presence, which in that presence invites for relationship to life, to the intelligence of life, and what that intelligence is speaking and gently guiding, and how that intelligence is subtly moving. And yeah, that intelligence is innately creative. You know, it is that, it's life serving, and so it has this it's creation, you know, it's the intelligence of creation and what that is.
And I really appreciate that point and that distinction, because I think it's important to emphasize that the reclamation process isn't in order to bolster our sense of control, right? To reclaim something so that we can then use it as a forceful, like as a way to force our way, or our our orientation into or onto the evolutionary process. So in that way, it's more of a settling and a sinking into what's already there. So then to me, it means that there's this incredible degree of unlearning that needs to happen. Right?
Yes.
An uncarving of our blocks, as the Zen Buddhists say.
And with that, you know, it's a submission to life, you know, a submission to the will that's greater than our own. a welcoming of the guidance of the intelligence that's beyond what we can conceive in our own minds, in our own human minds, and then merging like our physical matter with that consciousness, merging our physical matter, the intelligence of our physical systems with the intelligence, the life-serving intelligence that is life. And yeah, I think that it requires, you know, undoing a lot, like you're saying, and like carving away the buildup that we've acquired, that we've like become calcified with. And in that brilliance is just there, like it's always there. And so again, with like the presencing, there's so much emphasis on the presencing, but that's really what it is residing within what is there underneath all of the buildup, underneath all the calcification and the, where our systems are like stuck or lodged with buildup.
Mm. Mm.
Mhm. And there's another point that I was wanting to make, but it's lost on me now.
Well,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm thinking about like to innovate or to evolve in a time of unraveling.
Mhm.
Certainly characteristic of the times we're living in, right? Earth systems are unraveling,
Mhm.
social systems are unraveling, economic systems, so on and so forth. So to innovate at the edge of the unraveling is a really unique, like incredibly unique position to be in
Mhm.
as human beings,
Mhm.
taking birth at this time. And to me, like Stephen Jenkinson says something to the effect of, to awaken at this time is to awaken with a sob. That
Mhm.
the pain of the unraveling is so real
Yeah.
that we need to learn how to metabolize that pain. We
Yes.
need to, like, to me, I guess what I'm trying to say is a reclamation of evolution and innovation is also a reclamation of the essential skill of grieving.
Mhm.
And I would say it would be the, as well, the the steeping in and the humbling ourselves to dark wisdom, the wisdom that comes through the darkness of life, the pain of life,
Mhm.
the descent, as you said.
Mhm.
Those are just some thoughts that stirred from what you're sharing there.
Well, and I think that that's part of this cycle, like the circle, part of the logo for reclaiming evolution is the circle and the line is right underneath the circle for a reason. And so we're going through the full cycle of this motion of life. And part of what I feel like we've collectively been avoiding and conditioned to stay out of is the lower portion of the circle of the cycle and the higher portion of it too. We're very just like,
Mm,
from point A to point B with very little experience, like room for experience, very little room for experience.
mm,
So the bottom portion of the cycle is that decay, is that descent, is that feeling of the grief, is a feeling of the pain. And I think that that informs us of the rightful action to then take coming out of that. If we can actually feel deeply the impact of our actions and what we're doing and what we've done, we can be better informed in, well, what is a rightful motion then? We become aware of and connected to the sensitivities that we hold within of the vulnerable nature of human beings because we're very vulnerable creatures, especially like women and children are so impressionable by our environment and by all of the things that are going on around us, especially new children, brand new babies, how they're imprinted into by the way that we move through life is it sets the tone for the entire building blocks of their life.
mm,
And so if we want to reclaim our right to guide a future or steward a future, if we want to become an active, responsible participant within that, we need to understand how we're impacting ourselves as human beings, our children, the women that carry children. And so part of that is that deep feeling of feeling the pain and the grief, and where we've gone off of the mark, where we have strayed from the path, where we have stopped listening to the intelligence of life, and where we have, asserted our will over the intelligence, the will of what's greater than us. And so I think a lot of that process also invites for, a deepening in responsibility, a deepening in our capacity to like meet life and be with life. And I think that's embodiment. Embodiment is how embodied you are in and amongst life, but how you can also experience life, how you can feel all of the different facets of life. And part of that is the grief and the pain, and strengthening your capacity to meet life allows for you to be an active participant within it with more information and assert a stronger responsibility within life itself, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox in a way, because we were kind of alluding to this Taoist lens, which is like life is lifing, and you kind of need to get out of the way of that brilliance and intelligence and
Yeah.
allow it to bloom its natural bloom. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same rate, we're being called into active participation because there's important work to be done.
Yeah.
And so it reminds me, dear friend, brother Patrick Saline, he said that something like, it's the mark of maturation to be able to hold increasing degrees of paradox.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm hearing, that there's this necessity of deepening into our faith and trust that Earth, Gaia, cosmos, creator is more than capable of, guiding our way into a regenerative and beautiful future. And at the same rate, because we've dislocated ourselves, dissociated ourselves in some important ways in our mentality as a creature of Earth, that we need to also consciously participate in the reclamation process.
Mm-hmm.
It's strange. And I think it matters,
Oh,
because
sure.
people can get so caught up in doing the right thing and putting so much effort into doing the right thing, restoring a landscape, right? By planting a bunch of trees. But it's like, just because trees are good and that we need to reforest, it doesn't mean that going in and planting all the trees that you think are good and the way that you think is good is the way to restore that landscape, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's that intention to do good and to make effort, but there is the lack of the deep listening and the flowing with what is, to help steward, like you said earlier, rather
Mm-hmm.
than, it's like we're leaders but we're not.
Mm-hmm.
Life-centric leadership is, because
Mm-hmm.
life-centric leadership isn't a kind of leadership that just goes forward. I have the best idea, we're going to make it happen, follow me. It's like, oh, I'm listening deeply enough to humble myself to the slowness, and I'm willing to engage in a pace that might not be comfortable for my ego mind, my
Mm-hmm.
colonized mind,
Mm-hmm.
civilized mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that it's also like a choice to choose the path that is presented to us, that the living intelligence of life provides and that it signals to and like guides towards. We have to choose to participate in that. We become passive, and if we think, oh well, life will just life, and God or whomever will set the path for me and it'll just be what it is. But we actually have to choose consciously to obey that path, to listen to that path, to be willing to sacrifice ourselves to that path and the fires of the undoing of what that path initiates for us. And then we become these like conduits for the intelligence of life to then move through and act its will out through. And so we're an active participant in that. Our hand is the hand that, you know, is physically going to create a thing, but we've also surrendered the vessel to that intelligence and are willing to do what it asks of us, and also place ourselves in environments and relationships that help to strengthen what that relationship is. You know, the relationship with ourselves, because we do have a responsibility to healthily inform our human beings, our human selves, and we have a responsibility to consume responsibly. You know, everything that we take in informs the ecosystem that is our body and our mind and all of the systems within it. It informs that system of how to function, even though the function of what it's naturally meant to be is always there. But if we're consuming things over top of that, it dilutes that intelligence, or it makes it harder to hear and be responsive to, and harder to also see it outwardly as well. So we have this responsibility to purify our navigation system and a responsibility to consume responsibly, to you know, be aware of what we're taking in and what we're being influenced by and what we're also giving permission to in the process of that. And then with that, the ability to surrender into what life is asking of us, what, you know, God or whatever wording you're wanting to use, what that is asking of you truly, not what you think it's asking to you, but the call that's coming from a deeper place within, and that's experienced, we are better able to surrender to that and choose to listen to what that's requiring of us.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're making choices anyway, right? I mean, you can't help but make choices every day, and in
Yeah.
fact, many of them. And so the more consciousness you can bring to, well, is my choice life affirming or life denying? Is it getting more life, more resilience, more mutual care, more vitality and depth, or is it not? And so then, like you mentioned, the context and the environment and what we consume becomes so essential because it's shaping your perception as to uh, what is then influencing the choices that you make. And
Yeah.
I think this is something that everyone understands to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
but that all of us don't really, maybe we don't want to fully admit how much we are shaped by the things we consume and the
Yeah.
environments we're in,
Mm-hmm.
which for most people, the environments are primarily cityscapes, civilized cityscapes that are built on extraction and that are life denying in one of the greatest senses, you know? And then the things that we're consuming are typically, you know, on the phone, social media, media based, or, you know, TVs, movies, and then, of course, the food and things that we eat, and that matters. But I just want to focus for a moment on the degree to which social media and like the phone and the tech is shaping our perception. Because if we're going to talk about reclamation, then it necessitates that we talk about remembrance. And to me, remembrance, to remember, is to come back together, you know. It's to bring things back together again. And we have to be utterly honest with that process if we're going to do it in a good way, in a
Yeah.
real, rooted, reverent, life affirming way. And part of that honesty is to look at these little glowing discs that we carry around in our pocket and think, how is that shaping my ability to remember and reclaim my brilliance,
Yeah.
my soul's capacity to create beauty and connection. How is it shaping the way in which I make choices throughout my day, in how I consume, but also in how I give,
Mhm.
right? How I give of my essence and my energy.
Mhm.
And how does it affect the way that I connect with others?
Mhm.
Um, because as we're going to get into soon, talking about the festival that you're going to be bringing together in the summer,
Mhm.
it's very different to gather with people in
Mhm.
the flesh, um, with a certain intention and purpose, than to be caught in this illusion that your phone and the connections and the energy that you're giving and taking from these things are really bringing you back into a rooted sense of reclamation and remembrance.
Mhm.
Not
Mhm.
that it can't help in some ways, but I
Mhm.
just think we got to be as honest as we can about that,
For sure.
how much we're wrapped up in the tech world.
Mhm. Mhm.
Those are some thoughts that were bubbling up. I didn't really know where I was going with it, but that's
Mhm.
what ended up.
Well, and I think something to say about the phones is that the phones in like this tech world is that we can utilize it temporarily as a tool to come together with those whom we feel a resonance with and a like, oh, that person, that we're on the same path or a similar path, we're speaking the same language, we're felt the same, and utilize it as a tool to then bring that togetherness off of these tech things, off of these tech platforms and that landscape, and bring it into the real, in the earth, in the matter, feet literally beside each other on the same ground, bodies communicating in real time together, bringing those connections that are created or like brought into our awareness in this tech world, bringing them into real time is so
Mhm.
essential. And I say a temporary tool because I don't, this is such an, a discussion. Everyone has so many opinions about this, but I don't think that our dependency on these devices should be long term. I don't think that that's progressive for humanity. I think it's I think that it's here right now and we're awakening to different realities and truths of like how it's impacting us and all these different things. And I think that we can choose to come off of it. And at the same time, we can utilize it as a tool to strengthen our navigation and to bring us into connection with like-minded individuals whom we're needing to see and hear. A lot of the people that are coming together in the festival, they wouldn't hear about it if it wasn't for these devices. A lot
Mhm.
of the presenters and facilitators are across the globe that we've been brought into connection because of the felt resonance that's been discovered on these platforms. So there can be a purpose made of it.
Mhm.
And does it need to be a long-term dependency? No, I personally don't think so. And I think that this is why it's so important to create those in the person, in the flesh, on the ground, together relationships, and also inviting for the relationship with the natural world, because that's a key component to our depth of embodiment as human beings. Is we need to be in the elements with ourselves and with each other to remember essential skill sets that we've forgotten. We've forgotten how to work with the elements. We've forgotten how to tend a fire. We've forgotten how to work with water. We've forgotten how to, tend to the earth and what's growing from it. All these different things we've forgotten at large. And so I think that remembering those skill sets is so important and helps to also bring us together in the ways that I think that we're all kind of seeking and wanting.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and also, I do want to say is that our bodies are so wise. Our minds, our consciousness is so wise, where we can feel resonance with people, with the words that they're saying, with the things that they're creating on these social platforms. We feel something by the people that we're meant to be moved by. And it's a much different experience than, you know, an influencer who's telling you that you need to buy something or whatever. You know, or someone living out a life in a way and you're like, oh, I want to do that because I feel like I'm insufficient or I'm not good enough or something. Like there's two different kind of experiences, I think. One is like an invitation to deepen your relationship with life and your life. And another is like just perpetuating wounds or feelings of not enoughness, or, you know, giving us these satisfaction hits where we just watch someone doing the thing that we want to be doing, and then we don't actually do it ourselves because we've got the dopamine hit from watching it. And so we're not actually like going out into life and creating the thing that we want to create. And so I think there's, you know, a responsibility to cultivate there what we're consuming and how we're consuming it, and then what you're doing with the connections that you create on these platforms. I
That,
think that if we're not doing something with it, it doesn't matter. If all of the tech shut down tomorrow morning and we had no more access to it, what would you do with the
mm,
connections that you created? You know,
mm,
how would you find those people? How
mm,
would you be connected with them? Or
mm,
would you? You know,
probably,
and does that matter? I think so. I think it's important for us to be surrounded by people who see us, who hear us, who activate us, who challenge us healthily. We need that.
yeah. And who we can collaborate with in a
Exactly.
real way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Such good points you bring up there. And, you know, to be clear, of course, this project that we're, you know, contributing to right now is all happening because of tech, right? So much of my business, my life is in the tech realm.
Yeah.
And so I'm not like,
Mhm.
you know, I'm not trying to completely denigrate it, but because I'm so involved in tech, I can see, and I care, and I'm sensitizing on purpose over time. I can see how clearly it is not what we're here for. And so the distinction of use the tech to establish connections and then ensure that those connections are being sown into the soil,
Mhm. Mhm.
because there's no realness without that
Yeah.
in the long term, you
Mhm.
know. So yes. And something I just wanted to share, I was talking with friends last night over some glasses of wine about this topic for a moment. And I asked them, I said, would you give a phone to your child? And they were like, well, you know, maybe like that's kind of the way things are. And I thought about it and I felt into it in my body. And this is touching into the intelligence of the body. You know, if you really deepen into your felt sense capacity and you feel into like, do I want to give my child this glowing dopaminergic succubus of a thing? No, no part of me actually wants to do that. And so that really matters. So
Yeah.
then how, moving forward into life, how do I orient in a way so that I don't have to do that? You
Yeah.
know, that my child can be rather engaged with the livingness and
Mhm.
wildness of the world. And to touch back on something you mentioned, we cannot become who we're meant to become without the wildness of the world. You said, you know, for us to remember, we need to
Mhm.
do it out in the wild, in the elements together. And
Mhm.
I agree, because we are and have been forged by the wildness of the world. It's always been that way. Everything about us was forged through that. Um, so if we're going to remember, and if we want children to be raised as human beings, to be raised and to bloom into the fullness of their humanness, we need to be turning back toward the wildness in some kind of significant way.
Mhm.
And so, yes, um, maybe that's a good transition point to move into discussing the festival and how this is an act of gathering out in in the natural world together with the intention of remembering and reclaiming together.
One, I want to segue into that with another point on the phones. I think a big thing that a lot of us are seeking through the use of our phones and like what it brings for us is this sense of community, this sense of connection, and this sense of belonging, and this space to express out into. Because I think we have long, many generations of individuals not having a space to express their authentic brilliance into, because we've lost touch with the necessity of supporting that in someone, the rite of passage that supports you in coming into like who and what you're designed to be as the unique being of you and of me and whomever. And so I think these social platforms and whatever give us a space to express into. It gives us endless connections with millions of people, billions of people. So like, it's endless. And so I think that something is important, what you're saying of would you give your child a phone and whatever, like I cannot imagine my children having access to everything that this device can give someone access to. They do not need to carry that burden or be impacted by what you can come into touch with on here. There is an endless range of what you can come into contact with on there, and they do not need that.
Yeah.
No one should have that. But the thing that I do appreciate about my phone and like what it's, supported me with is the community that it has supported me in cultivating, the connections that I've created. And now I see it as my responsibility to bring those into real time and to do what I can do to create that kind of connection and that kind of community in the physical form, or not just myself, but for my children, so that they have women and men around them that can see clearly and hear clearly and see them and be with them and meet them to actualize their brilliance into life just by how they engage with them. And that's a large reason why I've done the work that I've done over the years, is because I realized, what we were surrounded by immediately was not necessarily doing that. And so the community that I needed to cultivate for myself to be the mother and the woman that I felt myself capable of being, I needed that community around me. I needed that space to actualize into, and my children needed that to experience what that feels like, to experience healthy relational dynamics, or at least, dynamics that are learning what that is. And for individuals that could see them in a deeper level and give them spaces to learn a wide range of skills and understandings and all kinds of things. And so for me as a mother and doing what I do, I see it as my responsibility to create these in-person experiences for myself, for my children, and for everybody around me that I want these people connecting in real life, body to body, voice to voice. It's so different when we can actually feel the presence of someone beside us and hear.
Good time.
And hear each other, receive their tone into our actual ears, and like their breath sharing in the same air as them face to face is just, there's nothing like that, and it's irreplaceable, and we should never try to replace that ever. And so I think, we've just lost touch with the importance of that and how significant that is for our well-being as humans, and how essential that is for the well-being of our children, which is the future. And if we do not create that, if we anchor into like the connections that we make on these devices being sufficient, and we're not actually going out into life creating healthy relationships or demonstrating that to our children, what the heck are they going to do? Where are they going to find their people? Where are they actually going to put something tangible and real into the world. And that is concerning to me, you know, as a mother. I'm like, you know, if all they see is connections on our phone and we're not actually doing anything in real life, like, what are they going to do?
Mm.
You know, who are they going to connect with?
I mean, I would suggest that they don't become human, right? I mean, they become some kind of cyborg type being, which
Well, mm-hmm.
seems to be some kind of strange, natural, progressive pathway that's
Yeah.
possible, right? There's all these possibilities of where we
And we're
can.
almost like enticed by it, you know, this rise of like AI art and like AI pictures of like people and things, you know, AI is like creating these like graphics and stuff. And it's appealing to our eye in a way. It has an aesthetic to it. It's like softer, it's like glowing in a way. And so we're seeing these AI images as more desirable than like what is actually in front of us, because we've lost the ability or suppressed the ability to see the radiance that life naturally is when we're actually meeting it, and we can see it clearly through clear eyes that can see. We can see that glow, and we can also see when it's absent and when it's not there. When someone is disconnected from that life force, you can see that and you can feel that and you can hear it too. But if we, you know, strengthen those skills within ourselves again and just invite for them to like come back online, then the aesthetic of life itself becomes appealing again and it satisfies us again, because it should. But if we're just anchoring into this like tech world that's so focused on AI, we lose our sensitivity to like what is like coming from the brilliance of life itself. You know, it's from this AI thing that's siphoned information from life, that's extracted information from life to become so like a replica of it, but it's not the same.
Mm.
It's
Mhm.
not the same. Even with like AI generated like content, like words, you know, you can feel the difference, and we should be able to feel the difference. And if you can't feel the difference, that's sad.
Mhm.
And I think that if, you know, we have individuals who are handing over their ability to craft words and create words to a system that's doing it for us, that's a really big thing that we're handing over. Like our ability to speak and weave with words and like bring form to life through our words is an essential skill and responsibility that we have as human beings. And if we hand that over, that's scary. Like, what are you going to be saying or writing? And like, how are you going to be going through the process of like coming into your language of like the expression of who and what you are and like what means something to you?
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah, so I just published, and we'll get into the festival in a moment, you know, because we only have a certain amount of time, and that's important to transition. But just to add to that point, I just published a conversation with Joe Brewer. It's the last episode that was out, and he describes what he calls the sociopath's dream. And that is basically, you know, Elon Musk and the Amazon guy and these big tech billionaires who imagine one day extracting all the resources of Earth, being able to extract resource from comets and other planets, and finding a way to eventually find eternal life by uploading themselves to some kind of, you know, system, simulation system that can hold their consciousness for eternity, while they continue to create some kind of extractive wealth. And we see how that's how things are going in some spheres of humanity. Um, you know, the Musks and the people aligned with that vision. And the thing is, though, to be sociopathic means that you have a lowered or non-existent capacity to feel the living touch of other beings. And so that's why that's a sociopath's dream, because to get to that point, you have to you have to either let go of or lose your capacity to feel
yep.
Earth, to feel other beings,
Mm-hmm.
right? To
Mm-hmm.
destroy landscapes, to kill off species, to destroy human communities, to
Mm-hmm.
destroy waterways, you have to lose your sense of feeling.
Yeah.
So the alternative to that would be the person who feels, right? Or whatever we would want to call that. It's the regenerative pathway. It's
Yeah.
the
And
pathway.
that's what we were saying in the beginning too, of like presencing to life, to deepen the capacity to feel it, to meet
Yes,
it, to be with it, and to be informed by it.
yes. So to really deepen into our felt sense experience, we
Yeah.
need to be together. We need to be enfleshed. We need to be ensouled. We need to be in contact and conviviality with
Mhm.
the living intelligences of place that are
Mhm.
beyond human. And so that's why I want to emphasize this rooting tech, these underlying desires that make us to turn toward tech for connection, rooting
Mhm.
that back into the earth,
Mhm.
because that's where we actually develop our felt sense. That you can't deepen and develop your felt sense in a really rooted and real way through tech connections. So we gather. And so what you're doing this summer in the beginning of August,
Mhm.
I see as a kind of radical remedy.
Yeah.
It's an
Oh, I love that.
experimentation of creating a radical remedy, remembering that radical, the etymology of radical is to be rooted.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it. It's so
Mhm.
special. I'm so excited.
Well, and a component of the festival too is that the people who are coming together to curate it, so the facilitators, presenters, the vendors that are showcasing their arts, the practitioners that are, offering various modalities and such, is that to the best of my ability is selected intentionally to be those who are listening to the way that life is moving through them and that they're demonstrating that brilliance and that unique gift into life. And so wherever they're placed, it's like they're placed there because they're expressing that out into the world. They're listening or learning to listen or like walking the path and figuring it out and sharing that with the world, sharing that with the community that we're building together. And with that informs the space that we're all gathering within. And it's through that, the conditions in our environment that we can actualize further, that there's safety established in the field so that we can actually go inward and turn inward. And safety in the field, I think, I mean, I've had this conversation a few times this week, actually. And one thing that I keep saying is like, no one feels particularly safe if your unintegrated aspects are being poked at. So to say like, you're going to feel the most safe, that there's just so many ways that we can like define what that means.
Mhm.
But safe in that you're able to experience the remembrance that's being asked of you through how you're walking into the space. Yeah. And so reclaiming evolution this summer is inviting for us to come home into ourselves as who and what we are, inviting us to experience others who are also on that journey of coming home to who and what they are, to experience the artistry that moves through the space. And that, I think we're all like artists, or we all have the ability to be artists of life in an endless range of ways. And so we get to experience the way that like the artistry of life is living and breathing through one another. And we get to deepen into that connection with the elements in the natural world, which, a point on this as well is like fire is fire. It's going to do what it's going to do. The ground is going to do what the ground is going to do. The earth is going to do what it's going to do. And I think that that's why it's such a great teacher is because it just is what it is. And we get to be with it and learn how to work with it because it's going to do what it's going to do. Water is going to do what water is going to do. And it will teach you and it will be unforgiving. It's one of my favorite things to do with my kids if they're not getting along is to like throw them out into the wild and have them figure it out because the wild is what the wild is. Not that I like leave them out in the wild, but they'll go and they'll explore and they'll need each other's help. They'll need support with each other, especially, the little one trying to keep up with the big one.
Mm-hmm.
And the elements are going to do what they're going to do. And they have to help each other. They have to support each other. And they have to work their stuff out in order to communicate what's going to work, what's not going to work, how to work with the landscape and all these different things. And they come out so much more like resilient in themselves and, strengthened in their relationship. And, the bickering kind of stops. And they gain confidence in that too. And so I think that it's the same with us as adults, is that when we can go and, really just like not throw ourselves into the wild, but also, do that too, if you can, because it will teach you in ways that like, other aspects of life can't and won't, because it is the teacher, regardless of if you want to see it as that or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so how willing you are to surrender to what it has to offer you, I think, is where the medicine resides, and it's unique for everybody. Yeah.
So the as far as I understand, the kind of some of the components to the gathering are this emphasis on traditional skills of various kinds, mixed with this exploration of how to collectively, collaboratively craft village mindedness and the skills and characteristics and qualities needed for real village consciousness, while also exploring different means of how to cleanse and clear our systems so that we can learn to be moved by life in a more real, rooted, reverent way. And then having the artistry and artisans and music there as a kind of holding amidst all of those beautiful, deep, collaborative processes that will be occurring. Is that kind of, I'm trying to give people a sense of the kind of like web of experience that you're intending to craft.
So one of the main emphasis is on the workshops. So the workshops are provided and what's contained within the workshops and those who are providing them. And so there's, a space for men and women together. There's a space just for women learning different things. It'll be just women's containers and for girls as well. And a space for men and boys. And then another space that is, various practical skill sets, like herbalism and bushcraft, martial arts, some movement, like body movement related things, animal husbandry, things like this in the like practical kind of skill set zone. And so when you are participating within the festival, you're journeying through the workshops, you're journeying through what you're called to, you're participating within that. And then there's, the feature of the marketplace where you have vendors, where you can, explore the different things that are brought in by the artisans and supporting them with their craft as well. There's the sanctuary space, which is practitioners, where you can schedule one-on-one services with people. And also there's some group offerings in there too. There's a really beautiful like tea space where you can go and have group sits with tea, which is an invitation to presence and to being with the elements that are incorporated into tea. That's just one aspect of the sanctuary. But then it's also, providing space for people to be supported in the sanctuary, but then also supporting those who are providing those services. And so, in a way, there's emphasis on establishing the village in a way, but in a way of like just letting it happen. Experiencing the way that it just happens when we come together with a specified intent, which is like, the intent that I hold in the curation of it, and creating the field, creating the environment, and then observing and participating in what happens when we do that, and how the village, the various roles within the village naturally are stepped into, and naturally it happens, it occurs. And so there's only so much I can say about it.
Yeah, it's
From this
amazing in many ways. Yeah.
Hey, buddy. Yeah, and then the artists, one thing that I want to say, and he wants to say things now too. Hi, buddy guy. Is that no matter what you're doing, like, you are an artist in this space. Like, the artistry, the way that I see art and like artistry is that it is life moving through you, and the way that your being is translating your communion with life. And so that's, speakers are artists, or musicians are artists, painters are artists, writers are artists, gardeners, or those who are tending to the lands, are artists in their way. And so it's also kind of like redefining what like artistry is, the way that I see it, at least. And then also, of course, there's, artists that express through, they're musicians or painters. We have a beautiful artist who's doing the art for like the festival logo, I guess, in a way, but just a beautiful art piece. And she's an incredible artist, and that'll be shared soon. But yeah, there's different places where the arts of various forms have a place to be showcased. But then also emphasizing that artistry is the way that you are translating your communion with life. And so, like, how are you an artist? And I think that can be like a question for everybody over there, is like, in which ways are you an artist of life? Like, in which way are you living your life? The way that you live your life is a demonstration of art, and let it be that, I think. Yeah, and then other components of the festival, there's like celebration in the evening, like dance and music, DJ kind of stuff, and then concerts, acoustic music on another one of the nights. Yeah, what else is there? The farmers market aspect, so like fresh local produce and foods that you can have access to. So that my intent with that is that people are like inspired to create wholesome meals and food together while we're there, instead of like, just landing in like camp food that people usually, I don't want to say everybody, but yeah, that we tend to think of as like the food that we eat when we're camping, because it's a camping style festival. So you can actually like learn how to cook food on an open fire or a camp stove, and like make real food for yourself. And also, bringing the farmers and ranchers and those who have homesteads that create different things, bringing those into the community, into the village as well, because that's like an essential component of it. And I think a part of this festival as well is like, not just in what it offers, I can like list out all the things and all the workshops and the different zones and this and that, but it's also the people. It's the people that are coming together, and the conversations that can take place in the spaces in between. It's the campsite or the fireside conversations, or, the way that you walk down to the water with someone, or the conversations that you share just in passing, or, and like what those conversations are going to do, and what those conversations are going to invite, because so many of the people there are, inspired visionaries that have something that they feel called to share into the world, and or are realizing that there's something deeper to life than the life that they've been living, and they want to reconnect, or not reconnect, but they want to connect with what that is. And so I think that the conversations that organically unfold by the people who are there are also a huge part of the medicine of the space and the purpose of it as well. It's a convergence, all these different streams are coming together to create a fertile environment for life to spring forth. And yeah, and then, observing what happens when we do that.
Yeah. It's so exciting because inevitably whatever emerges out of the sum of the parts is going to be something that we can only guess at, and I imagine it's going to be even more beautiful than what we could guess at. And it's just, I mean, it's really a revolutionary act, Jordi, in many ways, and a radical remedy to bring that back in. I really feel that it is that in the face of what we're all having to digest and metabolize and be with during these times. And so I'm so supportive of it. I'm so excited to contribute to it as well, and to be there and amidst the magic as it unfurls. And yeah, it's so beautiful. And I thank you for all the effort and care and heart that you have put in and that you are putting in to this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Is there anything else that you want to say as a closing note?
Yeah, I suppose the fall launch, we've launched our first wind of announcements. That's happened already, but the secondary wind is on March 12th. So you can keep an eye on that if this episode is out before then. If it's out after then,
It'll go out before then.
Cool. So yeah, March 12th is a date to look out for further announcements. And then the early bird, which are tier 1 tickets, are on sale until April 2nd. Yeah, and then there'll be continual announcements all through the year, kind of like dropping in little things throughout the month. So there'll always be new little pieces to share, and that'll be coming through. The festival itself will have a podcast launching this month as well. And so you can listen to conversations with the various presenters and myself and get a sense of what will be offered and what kind of information you can come into contact with through participating in the festival. Yeah, and the website has lots of information on it as well, starting on the 12th. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really beautiful, it is a really beautiful offering to life. And we're excited to have you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And there'll be all the links necessary to find anything that people might be interested in. Okay, committed listeners, thank you so much for making it to this point. I deeply appreciate your attention and your care. This is where we are going to pivot, and Jordi's going to flip the mic back over to me and interview me for her festival's companion podcast, as I am going to be contributing as a facilitator at her festival this summer. So I hope that you enjoy and find value in this second half of the journey.
So what does reclaiming evolution mean to you?
I actually ended up writing to that specific question because I didn't want to fumble and flounder trying to figure it out in the moment. And so I have a couple paragraphs written for that, and I'll answer in that way, and you'll have some threads to tug on, I'm sure, and then we can go from there. Okay?
Sounds great.
So, reclaiming evolution is an act of remembering, of tracing the mycelial threads of communication and change, not just through genetic lines, but through stories, landscapes, and the unseen forces that shape who we are and who we can become. It is a refusal to be bound by the narrow extractive definitions of progress and civilization that sever us from the intelligence of the living world and our pulsing hearts. It is a revival, a listening to the wild wisdom of Earth, the ancestral currents moving through our marrow to the deep time rhythms that remind us we are not separate from the breathtaking unfolding of life, but participants in its dreaming. To reclaim evolution is to recognize that growth is not always upward, that often it is a deepening, a composting, a surrender to the dark where new forms gestate. It is to reimagine what it means to be human at this precarious and precious time in human and earth history, not as dominators or even mere stewards, but as kin among kin, shaped by a real, rooted reciprocity and reverence. The old life-denying systems are unraveling. Their loose threads are slipping into the shadowed corners of our individual and collective psyche. Each of us carries an inherently life-affirming thread, uniquely woven through our own heart, one that only we can find. It is braided with the particular experiences, wounds, stories, questions, and dreams that are ours to tend. And it is our work, our necessary soul pilgrimage to follow that thread, those threads into the places we fear to go, to lovingly retrieve what has been cast away. Only through this kind of descent can we begin the slow, necessary reweaving, bringing what we have found back to the center, offering it into the larger fabric of becoming and belonging that is our earthly scenario. So I want to be clear that reclaiming evolution is not about ascending to some imagined state of purity or transcendence, but about continually revitalizing the complex, living tapestry of earthly flows and forces, a self-organizing, harmonizing, ever-emerging wholeness that holds us all. It is about entering the darkness of soil to be renewed. And we do this by reclaiming the wild wisdom of our hearts, by humbly re-inhabiting our creative niche as human creatures that carry the gift of regeneration, and by remembering our capacity to consistently deepen and adapt our ecological perception.
Wow.
That's what I'd say for now.
Just that. That is incredibly beautiful. Okay, and I wasn't expecting you to have written all that you wrote there, and me being in the position that I'm in, you know, carrying the vision of reclaiming evolution and feeling all of the things that I feel toward it and the ways that I've translated this vision myself, hearing you, another, share your words and what that phrase, well, it's not a phrase, but those two words mean to you, and receiving that and hearing that is so moving for me. Like, I was tearing up for the majority of the time that you were speaking. And, you know, I think that this might become a theme where that, you know, we're all saying the same thing in other words, and the way that we can translate what we're meaning or what we're saying or what's important in the mission that is bestowed upon us at this time as human beings. I think we need those multiple translations so that multiple people, more, you know, people can hear you and it lands, and the same message can land but in a different way because others need it, in other words, to hear it and to receive it. And so yeah, I'm actually really in awe with all that you brought together there, because it is so incredibly rich and deep in the meaning of what reclaiming evolution is, and my intent for it to be, and how I want for it to be received, and my prayer that's infused within it, and the prayer of life itself that's, you know, making itself known as it comes to life. And, you know, I really like how you defined that point of this isn't a journey for an ascension, for like a higher state to be reached, but rather a descent into the state that already is, and the state that comes alive through the decomposing and through really being with what remains when the buildup kind of falls away, which we alluded to this a little bit in our conversation that we had on your podcast. And I think that that's a really important piece within this as to kind of go with, because so often individuals are like seeking those climax points, they're seeking that ascended place, that the higher up and better than or more than what is, or trying to rise up into a higher consciousness. And there's lots of language around that, around like seeking thing, especially in the spiritual communities or alternative communities that are intending to find another way, but we're chasing that high. And so I like the emphasis on, no, this is a descent and a welcoming of the full motion that's required.
Well,
Yeah.
you can't bear life-giving fruit if your roots aren't deep in the dark, the fertile dark. So I think we're both speaking to a really important point, which is, yes, we are meant to grow up, to ascend in some kind of a way. But the problem is that there's these cultural memes that have been taken on that have caused people to neglect the fertile dark, the rootedness, that have caused people to turn away from their earthly inheritance as they gaze toward the sky and the stars. So it's not either or, it's both and the and is you need to have tended the roots to bear those fruits.
And so when you think of the work that you do at this time, in previous times, and your own personal journey, when has there been times where you've really been brought into communing with that, the dark, but the lower portion of the cycle, really tending to your roots, really tending to, the soil that you're rooting into?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's felt like most of my life since I was like 6, 7 years old. I'm not going to get into it, but I had some real troubling times when I was young. And so I was initiated into dark wisdom from a young age. And I'm not alone. I think many of us were. It's the nature of these times. So yeah, it's been this continuous process of learning to trust the decomposition, the death, and the inevitable renewal that comes out of that. And, having grown up in a culture that didn't have the psycho-spiritual infrastructure to facilitate proper initiatory processes for boy into young man into man, and man into father, and father into elder, that we don't really have that infrastructure. I've had to go seeking for little clues and bits and pieces, following the thread of meaning of my own heart. And I've been blessed and lucky in many ways to come across the right things at the right time, and making a lot of mistakes along the way. And that's part of the process too, right? As you're tracking your path, you're going to go the wrong way more times than you go the right way. And that's what helps refine your discernment and your understanding and your felt sense experience of what is actually here for you. And what you're here for, I think, is to be of service to a greater thing, to the greater whole. And so all the individual searching for me, and I think for the mature adult, is going to lead you back to the recognition that you're not here for yourself, that all the searching and tending to your unique wounds and experiences and darkness and shadows is not for you, that it's for you to then give. That's the whole point. So, whenever I became an adult and started entering intimate relationships with people, women, and it became very clear how immature I was in that process of deepening my roots in a real way. And so it's been this slow, long tending to that. And of course, there's been many different ways. But I would say most recently that taking on the work that I've taken on, which is to be in therapeutic spaces with people, I do counsel work with people, that's called forth great maturation, right? Because I'm sitting with people in some of the most vulnerable moments of their life in terms of them sharing their heart and their soul and their story with another. And so that takes on great responsibility. And I like to remind myself that responsibility means being able to respond. So it means that there's a deepening into the art of responsiveness, which means I need to listen, need to really listen. And I'm always reminded of this quote from Edge Henderson. He said, "To truly listen is to risk being changed forever." There's another quote, "Listening is worship." So what am I choosing to worship? Am I willing to be transformed by listening to life and whatever's happening in the moment? That takes a great sensitivity, a great willingness, a great courage to be with heart, to be with the immensity of feeling. And so the darkness never leaves. I look out at the world and I see systems collapsing. It never goes away. It's been here since I was born. We were all born into collapse. It's just the way it is. So there's no transmuting darkness. That's not what it's about. It's about deepening into it so that we can really be revitalized by that dark wisdom, that deep nutrient that can only be found there, so that we can then reach to the light. But it's not a means to an end. It's more circular than that, you know? So I think now, I'll sum it up with this. Dugald Hine, this amazing author, he talks about making beautiful ruins.
Oh, yes.
And that's where I think we are right now. We're in this incredibly complex and complicated, and those things aren't the same. And I'll just speak to that for a moment because it has a lot to do with what you're organizing this summer. Complexity is emergent. It's alive. It's greater than the sum of its parts. You can't guess where it's going to go, right? So it's deeply attuned to mysterious flows and forces that we can never understand. But that is creation and that is life. Complicated is what human systems are, right? Bureaucracies and organizations and things like that. And that's why they're all shit when it comes down to it, right? When we see real change happening in the world, it's emergent grassroots things that are making the change. It's never a top-down organization, ever, and it never will be. And so I'm trying to bring it back to my original point. Making beautiful ruins is looking out into the complexity and the complication of our now moment in our earthly scenario and going, okay, things are collapsing. We can't understand it, but we can feel it. And it draws us. If you really feel it and you really listen, it'll change you and it'll make you realize that you have an important role to play and no one can dictate that for you, right? That's that thread that you need to go find and find a way to weave it back into the center. But in the midst of that, you're going to have to make beautiful ruins, meaning things can't go on as they've been going on. So that's what reclaiming evolution is about to me as well, is breaking things down in a beautiful, life-affirming way so that they can then be composted and real rooted renewal can naturally arise. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts on that.
Something that keeps coming to mind is actually another note from our conversation that we had just the other day. where that which is composting and decaying and, you know, the darkness that you've been in and, you know, the things that exist in that lower portion of the cycle, that informs then the action that then comes from that. And I think that that's an important piece too, is that, you know, we can experience these things and then act differently, but informs, you know, where the motion of that word feels like it really comes inward and we're being informed. And then from that informed place, we're acting from
Mm-hmm.
there. And we're also being changed by that information. We're changing state. We're, you know, allowing that information to infuse into us so it becomes a part of who we are. And so then how we walk and how we carry ourselves will then also be reflective of that. And I think taking in the information of what has not worked or has worked well for what its intention has been, it's done its job actually very well. You know, the different systems and structures and societal ways of being that are not life affirming, that are essentially anti-life, they've done exactly what they've been designed to do. They're great at that.
Incredibly so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been incredibly successful.
Yeah.
And we're realizing that something different, something remembered is actually the way. And so we can be informed by what has not served life
Yeah.
to then understand what does serve life. And I think, you know, this kind of touches in on something that you were saying too, but many of us, you know, the experiences that we've had, they've shaped us. So that's, you know, failed relationships or not having the rites of passage that we move through held and supported. We've experienced a lot of what doesn't work. And I think that that's why so many of us are speaking out from that place of, hey, this is what I've experienced. This is the dysfunction that I've navigated. This is where I've misstepped or where I've, you know, made decisions that have, you know, been proven to be not essentially life affirming.
Yeah.
And they've served and they've informed me. And this is what I have to say about it. And this is, you know, my contribution into a better way for the generations to come and where we can adjust course to get on track. So something, you know, can be really built sustainably from that place. And so, you know, I think that this is possibly something important for those who are listening too, that, you know, your life doesn't have to be, if your life has not looked perfectly, there's information for you there. You know, what you have gone through and what you've journeyed through is medicinal for you and informs the servitude that you have to offer.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And Stephen Jenkinson says that darkness is brought to light by a diet of what it darkened. Robert Bly talks about eating your shadow. And the reason why is because, like you were describing, the systems have been working exactly how they are meant to, and maybe even better, but it's been in that life-denying way. And so we are all wounded by that. We are all wounded by that. And so, and because the holding of our society and our culture has been also not life affirming in a deep sense, we haven't had the kind of nurturance we've needed to receive a wound and to craft gold and a gift from it. And so instead, and this isn't always the case, right? But in lots of the time, instead, what we do is we push these things to the shadows. We turn away from them because they're scary, they're dismembering, and we don't have the right kind of holding we need to come back into wholeness by tending to them, mending those wounds. And so they're in the shadows. And so that's what Stephen and Robert are talking about. You have to turn toward it, and you have to take it in, eat your shadow, integrate it. And that's at the so-called individual level and also at the collective level, you know? And it's scary because when you start to do that, it can feel overwhelming, again, not having the right kind of holding. And it can feel like, you know, like when I say make beautiful ruins, it implies that things are dying and coming to an end. And that's rightly so, because it's true, right? And that might lead people to have this sense of like, oh shit, but an end is an end, you know? But an end has never been an end. That's not how creation moves. It moves through birth and death. So an end is an opening. And
Yeah.
same with the wound. Michael Meade says the wound is a womb. So it carries within it the gestative life force necessary to birth anew. And I just want to share a quote here, and I'll pass it back to you. It's by Rabindranath Tagore,
Mm-hmm.
and it's talking about this idea of thinking an end is an end, but then realizing at the soul level that it's actually an opening. He says, I thought that my voyage had come to its end, at the last limit of my power, that the path before me was closed, that provisions were exhausted, and the time had come to take shelter in a silent obscurity. But I find that thy will knows no end in me, and when old words die out on the tongue, new melodies break forth from the heart. And where the old tracks are lost, new country is revealed with its wonders.
Mm. Wow. Well, and I think, when I hear this, I think of drawing it back to like the breath that we are breathing. When one breath finishes, another begins again, and it's a whole new moment of possibility that opens up. And I think, in different stages of life, whenever we've reached a final destination of any kind of thing, when one task ends, when one, voyage ends, when one creation is reached its completion, and all we can see is that which we are, you know, pursuing at that time, or that which we are, in the mechanics of working with. And then as soon as that finishes, a whole new beginning opens up again. And I've experienced this multiple times in my own life, and birth is like this
Oh,
too, actually.
oh yeah.
This
Well,
is the current of life itself, where the completion of one moment is simultaneously the beginning of another. And for that motion, it's cyclical in motion. And this is actually the symbol for reclaiming evolution, is the circle and the line, for very specific and multi-dimensional, multi-layered reasoning. But this is one of those pieces, is that it is restoring the remembrance to this motion of life, and that in the end there is a new beginning, and in the completion there is a new initiation, and that it continues to go on and on and on. And one state shift from another, it is just that. It is a state shift. It is a transformation. And the more that we welcome that, the more life serving we become, the more in unison, in communion with life we become, because that is our natural motion of being. And when we are not that, we can use this also as a tool to inform, like, how to identify something that's not necessarily life affirming. If something is stagnant or stuck or has a defined end, that really there's nothing that comes after that, a dead end, or, a means to an end, things like this that are not necessarily in service to the motion of life, the current of it. They're informing of how we can better serve life if we allow for it to be transformed into that. But we can use this as a tool to also recognize that which is not in service to life, that which doesn't have these kind of characteristics along with it, are not in the innate movement, like the natural occurring movement, when we allow life to be what it is and how it moves. Um, and I think that this is a challenging point on the cycle for many as well, is that we resist the end because we fear that unknown. And at times, you don't know the next opening that comes until you've reached that final step for where you're currently at. The pathway doesn't present itself until it is the time for it to present itself. And I think, at large, we fear that unknown. We don't understand it because it's not there yet. We haven't lived it because the pathway hasn't been walked. And so we resist and we stay back from that edge because we feel like, we're walking to this edge and we're going to fall off, but we forget that the pathway actually continues and it presents itself as we begin to walk with it. And we have to trust that that path will be there and that our feet are going to continue to plant onto the ground, we're going to continue to progress forward and take those steps. And you're not going to just fall off a cliff and be totally bottomed out into the abyss. And I think that that's, this is an invitation for a piece of the work within us as well is gaining comfortability with that mystery and with the unknown, and being okay with that which we don't know, because we can't know it until we know it. This was actually kind of a theme for me in my most recent pregnancy with my son, where we have things in our culture where we can have ultrasounds and have the gender of our baby revealed to us and all these things. And I did this with my first two, and many people do. But the way that I experienced it and gazed upon this during this pregnancy, and what is so anchored into me now, is that I'm not actually meant to know who and what my baby is until I'm met face to face with my baby, until my baby is born and in front of me. And my baby is not known to me until he is in front of me. And then that becomes the knowing of him, through the sensory experience and the download of who this little baby is. And that the meeting of him, because obviously he's a boy and he was him. So meeting of him in that moment after birth, he's been born and he's here, it is such a different experience than finding out beforehand and coming into information that I'm not actually meant to know. If we were meant to know these things, we can have intuitive inclinations and all these kinds of things, and I'm sure people often are talking about connecting with their spirit babies and this and that, but the truth, I feel, is that we actually do not know. Knowing through the sensory experience of physically meeting and knowing something until it is in front of us. And so even if I had an intuitive hunch that I knew that my baby was a boy or whatever, I truly actually do not know until I'm met face to face, and until my ears, my eyes, my body can take in this experience. And I think that translates into life as well, that there are things that you're not meant to know until the very moment that you're meant to know them. And I think establishing a trust with that the information you need and the directives that you're going to need to take in to inform your decisions, you're going to know them exactly when you're meant to know them.
This is a really profound point, actually, and there's so many different threads we could follow. There's a few things I want to say on it. It's vast. It's we could spend like days talking about this, really. But the indigenous folks of the plains, at least here in North America, and probably most indigenous folks across the world, understood what we might call God or Creator as the great mystery. So the underlying fabric that allows the matrix of creation and life-bearing flows and forces is inherently mysterious. These people understood that. That matters a whole lot, because where colonized hearts and minds veered off on a destructive path is where they forgot that. That because when you think that you can know the universe, when you think that can figure out, pull things apart and discover the secrets of creation, you've lost your way. And I imagine all indigenous folks would say something like that they would agree on that point. So it begs the question, how can you trust life? How can you trust creation if you think you can know it? If you think your human mind and heart can know it, how could you ever trust it? It's a profound question. I'm just posing it to all of us here. And I'm reminded of John of the Cross. He was this Catholic Christian mystic, Spanish mystic from the 16th century, I believe. He talked a lot in his own way about dark wisdom, which we've touched on. And he said things like, in order to draw nearer the light, the intellect must advance by unknowing rather than by the desire to know, and by blinding itself and remaining in darkness rather than by opening its eyes. Somewhere else, he talked about if a man or woman wants to truly know the road they tread upon, they must close their eyes and go in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
Why are these people talking in this way?
Mm-hmm.
It's very much what the indigenous folks are saying when they say the great mystery. It means you can't know. And that's the beauty and that's the glory, that your trust and faith in creation is actually about moving forward, being moved by life through unknowing, trusting that this is a Taoist concept too, right? The idea that you just flow with the way of things, because the way of things have been doing their thing forever, right? And then at some point, the human heart and mind, or I would say the human thinking mind, the human intellect, got hijacked by some kind of viral mimetic force that caused us to think, no, we can figure it out. And in fact, not only can we can figure it out, but we can make it better. We can improve upon the design. Let us control the outcome. And we can see what's happening with that kind of orientation. Things falling apart, not in a natural way, in a heightened, chaotic, disorienting, and very painful and destructive way. So again, needing to humble ourselves and begin to craft and broaden our perception and understanding of what life really is, enough to realize that we'll never really know what it is, and that we can only ever participate in the moment to moment unfolding, that we can only ever show up and listen and be changed and be moved and take action and collaborate and reciprocate and love and revere. That's all we can do. And then we have to give our trust and faith over to the fact that life is going to life, earth is going to earth. But when we're out of alignment, we're going to cause the kinds of things that don't feel good in our hearts, the kinds of things that won't allow our grandchildren or our great grandchildren to even exist, let alone have any kind of life worth living.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that has come to mind to mention as well is that I think that these are also invitations to experience, which you kind of went into this at the end where, you said to participate within it. And I think that life, the mystery is meant to be experienced through us, and through the experiencing of life and the mystery, we become known to it and it becomes known to us, and each moment is further along on that journey, and that everything that'll be presented to us is, we can't know that, but it becomes known through the way that we allow it to move through us and the way that we can presence to it. Like if you're holding a stone in your hand and you're just holding it and it's like, okay, yeah, there's a stone in my hand. And you can take your time holding this stone in your hand and really like move your fingers over it, sit with it, see it, look at it, gaze upon it, understand it, really, get in touch with as close of an experience with this stone and with the memory of this stone and with this like feeling of this stone as you can. And, this is just like an example to kind of create some imagery around the experience of like knowing. But if you let something move you from within and carve you from the inside out and imprint into you and create impressions within you, you're going to understand it in a really unique kind of way, as well as understand that you can never fully understand all that it is offering to you. And so I think that it's like a both and experience where it's becoming known to us and us known to it. And at the same time, unraveling into the unknown that there's an edge that we can never possibly fully know or fully understand. And I think that that's, the beauty of it. And perhaps that's a piece that keeps us in pursuit of life,
Yeah.
where it can continue to be interesting to us and educational to us and inspiring for us, and the artistic way of translating life never has to cease, because it's always unfolding, it's never ending, it's
Mm.
always there. And I think that's something, when we really tap into the way that we commune with life and the way that we are inspired by life, every single person has a very unique and individual relationship with like what this is, and that's their own creative muse and way of being in service with their puzzle piece. Everyone is going to translate this differently, but when you're tapped into that current, when you're with that current, it's never going to end. You get to live that out forevermore.
Mm.
Your life and who you are is etched into by this current, and your servitude is informed by your relationship to the current.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is that we have the opportunity to deepen into intimacy with life.
Oh, yeah.
And Mark Gaffney says that intimacy is the context for revelation.
Mm.
It is the context for revelation.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're talking about is, and I mentioned it too, is we have our own unique path, right?
Yeah.
As we've talked about too, it's connected to the whole.
Yeah.
So yes, you have your path, but your path doesn't exist without all the millions of other paths that
Yeah.
interpenetrate your own, right?
Yeah.
So coming into greater intimacy is going to reveal to you what it is that you're here for. And you practice intimacy by things like you mentioned, becoming sensual with a river stone, right? You can't know the shape or the name of a stone unless you touch it and you feel it and you allow it and you commune with it. And that
Yeah.
goes the same with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So this is and also this is, I think, important to mention that it's not about exteriors,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think part of the issue of our times in the last hundreds to thousands of years, and especially heightened in the last 100 or so years, is this obsession with exteriors. And
Mm-hmm.
let me explain that a little bit. You can have exteriors down to an atom, okay? So you can cut something up into its tiniest components, and that orientation to even take the act of cutting something up to figure out what it's about is an obsession with exteriorities.
Mm-hmm.
And as we know, if we feel into it, exteriority is not the essence of creation. That what makes life life is the interiority. This is what I'm saying, the great mystery. It's the mystery of a thing. It's the
Mm-hmm.
essence of a thing. It's the unseen, the unknowable, the unnameable essence of a thing that makes it a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are coming into greater intimacy with life, it's not about, oh, this river stone is beautiful. Yes, yes, and there's so much depth to that river stone. You can
Yeah.
never know, even if you're a geologist and you have a PhD. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
that's probably going to make you less available to intimacy with the stone than the 5-year-old child
Yeah.
frolicking in the riverbank. Do you get what I'm saying?
Oh,
So
for sure.
exteriority and interiority. And I think this matters a whole lot about what we're saying, because the to make beautiful ruins, you have to be oriented toward the beautiful. And
Yes.
as we know, even though we all get confused every day of our lives, beauty isn't about the exterior,
Yeah.
right? So we can move into the next moment.
And I love, the contrast that you put there of like the geologist and the 5-year-old, frolicking in the riverbank and finding these stones. And I think a piece that is different between the two as well is the childlike wonder and creation and imagination and the story. And children exist in this realm where they explore and expand so beautifully into creativity and into story and into translating the world through these really like psychedelic kind of spaces. And so I think that's part of, you know, the relating with the mystery as well, is that it's a very like naturally psychedelic experience where it's filled with story and, you know, creative depictions of things. Because sometimes the way, I think this is why poetry exists, actually, to be honest, is that the way to translate into words and into like our way of communicating with each other is something that is so endlessly filled with possibilities and history and story, and everything is through this creative muse that, you know, depicts a story to try to convey the thing that is like being experienced. And I think that, you know, that's what an artist does. You know, we try to find these ways to like explain the experience of living out life and living in the mystery and living, you know, with all that we have here. And yeah, I just, you know,
It's
got inspired by that piece
yeah,
because,
and
yeah.
it's a really good point. Like, what are children doing fundamentally that's different than us? I would suggest that they are feeling very deeply, that they haven't been trained not to feel like all of us have.
Yeah.
So they're they're opening themselves up to far deeper communications. Sure,
Mhm.
we have the capacity to generate deeper, more profound, more mythic meaning from our experiences because
Mhm.
of our development and our maturation, though many folks aren't very good at that because of not being, not learning how to. But children are feeling so deeply. And I think that that is something that we also need to revive or reclaim in this overall reclamation of evolution. And like what you're talking about, our artistry and our creative wild hearts, is we need to come back into we need to deepen our capacity to feel the living touch of the moment and the world upon our
Mm.
hearts. And we need to learn how to touch in return,
Yeah.
that is rooted in reverence, respect, and reciprocity. And that only comes through deep feeling. The
Yeah.
meaning that we make of it comes after. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of poetry. And I love that you mentioned the word psychedelic, because psychedelic it means soul revealing. And so, yeah, children are always in psychedelic states because they're communicating and living from their souls.
Yeah.
And then our society and our cultural and familial structures bury that shit, and not
Mhm.
the good kind of bury, like bury it and lock it away, you know? And so to reclaim our childlike wonder and bewilderment in the face of the mystery is to become psychedelic as a way of being. It's to reveal our souls and to be willing to be humble enough to be touched by the soul of the world and all the living intelligences of it. And the
Mhm.
Greeks, or the Athenians, the ancient Athenians, had this amazing word. It's pronounced astasis. And astasis basically means a sharing of soul essence. And it's what happens when you're walking through an old growth and you come across a 800 to 1,000, 1,200-year-old cedar tree, and you take an in-breath. Like, you can't even compute the moment with your intellect and your thinking mind. And you breathe in, you're inspired. You take in breath, you take in soul. And the Athenians thought you were literally taking in the soul of that tree, and it was taking in yours. And you feel this too when you see a puppy. You didn't know there's going to be a puppy, and then there's a puppy. That's a stasis. You're sharing soul essence with that puppy in that moment. We do it with children too. We can do it with each other. And in fact, we can do it with everything in the living matrix of this earth.
Yeah.
Why does that matter? Because that is psychedelic. That is the reclamation of our evolution and our capacity to innovate on the scenario that is our context at the time. Our ability to be inspired, to be creative, is our ability to bare our souls, and have the willingness and the courage to be touched by another, to
Mhm.
share it, a stasis.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. And I think just to add one piece here, because it feels relevant, and to also be aware of what it is that we're then experiencing this with. So having that conscious consumption, that conscious relating with what is informing you, what are you in this state with, what are you sharing psychedelic experience with, not, just innately in life.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that then impressioning you and informing the way that you orient to life? And if you are communing with life-serving objects and, sustenance and things, it's going to be a much different reality that you're existing within than the other.
Yeah. Yeah. So one more point there, and I think you might want to ask me another question, but I think this is important, that stories matter more than we can ever know.
Mm-hmm.
That according to depth psychology and indigenous ways of knowing and living, that mythology, the mythic forces that underlie the patterns of emanation that are earthly creations and beyond, those mythic forces they're so ancient. They go back before time, and we're living them out. And we generate stories because of that, and our ancestors were all oral based storytelling cultures for many thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of years, sharing stories. Why? Were they just trying to entertain each other? Well, yeah, that was part of it. We need to feel joy in life, but those stories were laden with the intelligence of place,
Yeah.
and the limitations, the rules, the natural law of place. And so what you're talking about is pay attention to your environment, right? Which us as humans, we're really, really good at that if we train ourselves and each other to be able to perceive and pay attention and discern and create meaning that is life affirming. But we've been hijacked by civilization. And look around. If you're in a city, how much wildness do you see? 0%. You see wild possibilities emerging from cracks, but they're scuffed out, they're contained, they're controlled. That matters because you're in a hall of mirrors of humanity.
For sure.
So this reclamation of evolution is also a turning toward the wildness of the world.
Yeah.
And it means you have to be honest about what's surrounding you and how it's affecting you. If you're living in a city, you're a civilized, very tamed and domesticated creature. And what do we know about domesticated creatures? They get sick. They're not very smart compared to wild creatures. All these sorts of things that aren't inevitably healthy for the longer term evolutionary process.
Yeah.
So remembering that the reclamation is also a turning toward like going beyond the pale of civilization. If you have to live in a city, great, but it's more about attuning to that way of seeing and being and living, becoming, belonging that matters most. Yeah.
And I think, I don't want to say necessarily reclaiming, but stepping into the responsibility of stewarding your participation in life with intention, with discernment, and strengthening the filtration system that we have as human beings to recognize, what's actually serving that greater picture, what's actually going to get you into right relationship with the fundamentals of life and the natural world.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, part of Reclaiming Evolution, the festival, and, everything that it's inspiring for is also the reconnect with that responsibility and the invitation to strengthen discernment and to begin to walk with that, because if we're actively participating in the death culture, it's going to continue to exist. It only exists because we consume it. If we don't consume it, it has nowhere to go, and it ceases. And so it's our participation in the consumption of it that is giving life to the things that we, feel counter to. But it's like, okay, well, how strong are you in your individual will as a human being to say no, or to, discern what you're receptive to and what you're going to take in and give permission to.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's, a really important piece.
And we have to do it together, right?
Yes.
Which is why we're gathering for this festival, because you can, hello, Noah.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you. You look beautiful. Because we can't, like, the homesteader, right? Beautiful, right? Going back to the land, learning how to live with the land, how to live in reciprocity, how to be regenerative and take care of yourself and your family. But if all your neighbors are locked in to the overarching system of extraction, I mean, your waterway is going to be poisoned.
Yeah.
Your way of life isn't going to last very long, right? So so many of us have this so-called individual impulse to take a new path, to renew old ways of wisdom and knowledge, and to have to we feel the call. We feel the call of the wild, basically. But what we're learning and what we need to learn is how to do it together, because as the systems collapse around us, we're going to have to. I love how Sophie Strand says, if we're going to survive, we're going to have to tie our roots to other roots. A forest doesn't exist without deep interrelation and communication and collaboration. It's co-arising. So our liberation is actually co-liberation, and our creative impulse is always co-creative. And so the sooner we can turn to each other, to gatherings like this, and take what we learn from these gatherings and bring them into our own communities and begin weaving, tying our roots to other roots, that's going to give us the best chance for living a life that's beautiful and meaningful, and that can actually be passed down to future generations, so that they can have some kind of possibility of being human. This special, unique opportunity to be a human creature, Earth's children. So, yeah.
And I think recognizing that, we're planting seeds and tending to trees and growth that we may never actually eat the fruits of. And that can be okay. It's like a sacrificial offering to the betterment of the larger whole, that, the fruits that will come from these creations that we're nurturing and, bringing forth into life, that we may actually never enjoy the fruits in this physical form.
Yeah.
And that enjoyment is actually for a generation that's yet to come.
Yeah. So agave farmers know this in Mexico. When you plant agave and you're a middle-aged farmer, you're not going to drink from those agave. You're not going to extract the nectar, the nutrient, the beauty, the elixir of that magical plant. You know it when you plant it. It's your children that will. And we know this about many fruit trees too, that most of them won't come into maturation for many years. And so nature knows this. Like an old growth tree, if you're not ecologically literate, you might think, oh wow, what a powerful tree, survival of the fittest. That tree must have found the most light and has managed to stick around for 500 years. What an incredible individual organism. And it's like, no. That's not what a forest is, and that's not what a tree is. I would suggest that the whole reason for a tree even ever living that long is so that it can provide nutrient for its kin and all those that are younger than it, so that it can learn how to adapt over ages and aeons, so that it can pass down that knowledge for the greater forest ecosystem. It's not there going, yes, made it to my 500th year. What a great tree I am. It's living to give.
Yeah.
It's living to give.
Mhm.
So I think that that's what we're all realizing, people tuning into these kinds of conversations, we're realizing, whoa, we were born into a culture and a time that was not living to give. In fact, it's been the dead opposite.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Beautiful. Well, I think, I'm looking forward to having you at Reclaiming Evolution, and I think those tuning in and listening to this will also feel, excitement to experience you and your offerings and what you have to share with us there. And yeah, and those who have yet to know you or have yet to come into contact with you, I'm sure will be really blessed in doing so when they do at the festival and when we come together
Mm,
this summer.
mm.
Um, I think our time is nearing its end. Is there anything that you want to end with or anything that you want to?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so first of all, thank you for having this conversation with me.
Yeah,
I think it's clear, evident that I love having conversations like this.
it totally.
And I'm so grateful to be brought on to this incredible roster of folks who are going to be sharing their gifts with the festival.
Yeah.
I I've shared the festival, the website with multiple people, and their response was always something very, very emotional. Like they were
Mhm.
touched in a deep way just from reading what it's about. So it's going to
Mhm.
be deeply meaningful and more than any of us can guess at this point. The sum is going to be so much more grand and incredible than the sum of its parts, the whole. And so I'm super stoked about that, to offer a workshop and some movement and also
Mhm.
a dance experience that's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess I just want to say to folks, um, you know, think about, reflect on the times where you have felt amazement or even bewilderment,
Mm.
moments where you felt just blown away by the beauty and intricacy and mystery of life. Reflect on those moments and feel into what was happening then,
Mhm.
and consider why it matters to integrate those feelings more deeply and to actually wrap them up in your heart cloth and carry them with you and keep them near and dear,
Yeah.
because it's those earlier experiences, and as they continue to unfold and you continue to wrap them up, it's those experiences that are helping to refine your discernment of what is life affirming.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'll say too, just a little plug, I have a podcast project and I have these kinds of conversations. It's called Wild
Mhm.
Heart Revival. So come hang out with us. Amazing guests there. And
Yeah.
I offer individual, couples, group, threshold counseling for
Mhm.
wanderers, and edge walkers. And I also offer support for death and dying.
Yeah.
So, you or someone you love or someone has died, grief, things like that. So and I'm always open to meaningful communication. If there's any real interest, I love
Yeah.
meeting with people and just having conversations that are important. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Beautiful, Tay. And your work definitely, all the things that you have to say and the things that you have to contribute into conversations like this, it's evident that the work that you do is connected within that deeper well of who you are and how you orient to life and how you gaze upon it. So thank you for sharing yourself and all the different ways that you do.
Doing what
And,
I can, learning slowly. Very,
and
very
forever a student in the mystery of
fire.
life.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you,
Beautiful.
Jordi. See you.
Thank you.